What's up, y'all? It's Corey Alexander, school counselor, and these are the Middle School Chronicles. Today, I'm going to give you 5 tips on how to suggest you help your students deal with gossip. 1 is explain to them about the communication gap. I had 2 young ladies in my office yesterday, and I explained to them how important having a conversation is. It's important in race relations, in politics, in parenting, in marriage, and in every aspect of society. So I explained to them, just like politicians have 2 sides of a story, 2 sides of objectives. Until they sit and speak to each other and explain why one feels the way they do, people are usually at odds. So I shared that example, and the young ladies seemed to get it. They did understand that when they first spoke, they had a fantastic conversation and had settled on building a friendship until other people came into the fray and started causing strife by saying this person is talking about this person. When they sat down with each other, they admitted to each other that they didn't speak about each other at all, and it was all hearsay. So the first thing you need to do, the first suggestion I have for you, the first tip, is to explain to students how important communication is and how important having a conversation is. The second tip I want to share that I shared with my students is we live in a Twitter society, meaning even though what they are going through is pretty traumatic, because by no means do I dismiss their feelings. You know, as an older person, we can dismiss their feelings and saying, oh, that's nothing. You won't think about that 10 years from now. It'll blow over. Don't worry about it. I don't treat my students like that. I let them know that what's important to them is relative to their life, to their social setting. So after I acknowledge their feelings and show empathy, I explain to them and give examples on how in 2 minutes, which means a day or so, no one is going to talk about what's going on right now. And I draw examples from society, or I ask them to tell me, when's the last thing that happened in school that a lot of people was talking about? And how long did that rumor mill last? And then they acknowledge that yes, they do see how this too shall pass. The third thing I talk about is not everyone in the school is talking about what they're going through. The first sentence that students tell me is, everybody is saying. So, we get a little chuckle in that, because not everyone is saying. So when I was talking to the 2 young ladies, I said, I'm confident that if I pulled 10 people out of the hallway right now, none of them would know what you're going through. So they laughed. They saw the hyperbole in which they were behaving, that the whole school is talking about this one matter, when in fact the whole school is not talking about what they're going through. It just seems like that because the people closest to them are talking about it. So we cleared that up. That's number 3. Remind them that not everyone is talking about it. Number 4, they have to choose what to believe. These 2 girls had a conversation, talked about their differences, and said, hey, let's be friends. Once they did that, other people, little vultures, little birds, trying to chirp in their ear, started spreading rumors. So I suggested to them, look, you have to decide what you want to believe. And what you want to believe is what you're going to put energy into. I gave an example. So you and I are having a great conversation. And I asked them, are we having a good conversation? They said yes. I said, so what if when we leave, you see a teacher and the teacher says, oh, you and Mr. Alexander, he doesn't care about you. You have to decide, am I going to base what I think about Mr. Alexander on the conversation we had in person, what I heard with my own 2 ears, or I'm going to believe this negative comment from someone else? I explained to them, as they mature, they will have to choose what they want to believe. They want to believe negative talk or the conversation and the relationship that they're building that they can put some stock into because they're witnessing it firsthand. So that was an aha moment for them also. The fifth tip, the last tip, is bad news travels fast. So I talked about society, how the gossip columns, right? Bad news, the news, 90% of the news is bad news. Bad news travels fast. And so if someone hears something that's negative, they want to share it as soon as possible, because from whatever, the sin nature is in our society. So I talked about the actual news on television, how it's all bad news. It's all doom and gloom, how doom and gloom sells. I mentioned how Kanye, his interview on Drink Champs, he had a real poignant point in the respects of the tabloids. They like bad news. They want to see him and Kim Kardashian break up so they could talk about the new love interest. Always what's new, what's next, reporting bad news, a divorce, this, that, and the other. And so I explained that to them, and they realized that yes, in fact, bad news travels fast. And a side note, young people, as well as old people, they like to have the news first. They like to break the story. So students want to come and tell them what they know to seem like they in the inner circle of gossip. They're one of the cool kids, and it's kind of validation to show that they know what's going on. So those were the 5 areas, and those were some of the examples that I gave my students on how to deal with gossip. And to recap, 1 was the communication gap, the importance of having a conversation, to not always agree with each other, but at least learn the perspective that the other person is coming from, thus some understanding, which will lead to respect. Not agreeing all the time, but respect. So the communication gap was number 1. Number 2 was the Twitter society, how stories and bad news don't last as long as they think it's going to last, and this too shall pass. The third thing was not everyone is talking about it. It seems like that because it's coming at you from different directions, from the people closest to you, but not everyone is talking about it. The world is not revolving around this one story. The 4th aspect was they have to choose what to believe. And the 5th tip that I gave the young ladies was how bad news travels fast. And they have to be mindful of what they want to let in to their thoughts. And so these were the tips that I gave. It was a phenomenal conversation. I hope it sticks. They were very understanding of my points. And I tend to ask, does that make sense during the conversation? That's another tip when you're talking to your children or your students. Ask them along the way, does this make sense? Do you understand where I'm coming from? And make examples that are age appropriate. So that's what I did. I made examples that were age appropriate. And so these were 5 tips on helping your students deal with gossip. I hope I helped the young ladies. It seemed like I did. They were crying in the beginning of the meeting, and they seemed to want to work on their friendship by the end of the meeting. So I hope you have success with your students and your children as well. And I hope this was useful. If you have any other suggestions, feel free to put them in the DMs, email me, visit my socials, or put the comments in the comments. All right? Love.